Good morning. This is the BLAINESWORLD show, or actually a podcast that can be found each week on Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, Spotify, you name it, you'll find us. I'm your host, Blaine Greenfield, and I'm here in my Zoom studio in lovely downtown Fairview, North Carolina. And each week we focus on positive news and information about people and organizations in both Western North Carolina and throughout the country. And toward that end, it's my pleasure to introduce the first of two guests we have tonight that certainly will be talking about some of the great work they do in the Asheville area. And she is Beth Russo, Executive Director of Eblen Charities. And welcome aboard, Beth. You can wave to all your fans and friends who may be watching this.
Okay. Thanks, Blaine. Thanks for having me.
And that's Beth. And Beth has been involved with nonprofit organizations for many years, working for the Asheville area Habitat for Humanity and Homeward Bound before joining Eblen Charities as their Executive Director earlier this year. She's also worked as a therapist and college professor. That's kind of my background as a college professor. Her personal theme in life is working to help make the world a better place, particularly for individuals living in, on, and on the edge of poverty. She's happily married to Todd Weatherly, who enjoyed being, okay, that's right, now I get it, Todd Weatherly. Now I see the connection, who was a guest on Blaine's World also. And Beth, the question I always ask people for the first time is, as a kid, you grew up where?
Actually, I'm a military kid, so I grew up all over the world.
Okay, and so growing up all over the world, did you always know you wanted to be this person in the nonprofit sector? Was that your goal in life?
Not at all. I didn't even know the nonprofit sector existed. And I'm pretty sure for a long time I wanted to be a veterinarian until I learned about having to euthanize pets.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Yeah. But I've always been drawn to wanting to help other people and just, make the surroundings around me a little bit better, whether it was for people or animals or the environment.
Well, I was going to say same thing too. Even with animals, you're helping other people, making the world a better place for animals. So that's interesting. A veterinarian, you don't realize that, but it's still part of their job. They have to, euthanize pets. So how did you get into the nonprofit sector?
Well, actually, when you mentioned I was a college professor, I used to teach in the Wilderness Leadership and Experiential Education program at Brevard College.
Okay.
And I was there for 5 years. I loved it. But every other year we would go on a 21-day expedition and have about 36 nights out in the field. And when I had my first child, I did not want to leave him for 21 days at a time. And so I left Brevard, stayed home for a couple of years. And, it was both tough to go from that kind of working environment to being a stay-at-home mom. But it was also tough financially. So after about 4 years, I went to work at the Asheville Area Habitat for Humanity as a volunteer coordinator and really just fell in love with what nonprofits do and how much of a difference they make for our community. So I've been in it ever since.
And when you think about it, as you said, you were still involved in nonprofits because Brevard, in terms of the college setting is a nonprofit, when the military is, a nonprofit. So I guess you've been involved in that world, all your life. So you then with, was it Habitat Humanity?
Yes.
And how many years were you with them?
I actually worked for them twice. First, for several years in their volunteer services program, where I got to work with all kinds of amazing people who are willing to donate their time. And then I went and worked at a public Montessori school in Maryland for a year. And then came back and started working at Homeward Bound. And at Homeward Bound, I worked in both fundraising, but also as a communications director. And then about 6 years ago, I went back to Habitat to work in their fundraising department.
Okay, so you then left Habitat then to come on board at Eblen. When did you come on board at Eblen?
Just at the beginning of the year, and really the first week of February.
Okay, and so let's talk a little bit about Eblen for the benefit of folks who don't know about it. Even though, to your credit, you certainly do a good job getting the word out. And I'm saying that as a compliment because, boy, do you see Eblen out there, in terms of serving folks in this area. In your own words, though, can you tell us what Eblen Charities is all about?
Well, one, that makes me really happy to know that you're seeing us all over the place because that means that our efforts are working.
Well, just jump in, yeah. Especially, you have a great relationship with WLOS because, I love watching it. They say, Eblen's doing this, come on out. And it's really, I think it's certainly working because I notice it.
Great. Well, we have a wonderful relationship with WLS as well as iHeartMedia. They help us get the word out about a lot of our work.
And now Blaine's World too, by the way.
And now Blaine's World. We're going to be worldwide momentarily. Eblen Charities is a homegrown charity. It was born and raised here in Asheville, and it came about after a gentleman learned that another dad was trying to get his daughter some medical treatment and struggled to pay to drive to Durham to get the treatment and to stay there. And as a result, Eblen Charities was born about 31 years ago. What I love about Eblen is that we are here to help Western North Carolina neighbors, primarily Buncombe County and surrounding counties, with all kinds of essential needs. We help with housing and utilities. We help with gasoline and medications and medical equipment. And we operate a bunch of different events that are actually we're gearing up for right now that help serve people who are living in poverty or at the edge of poverty, be able to have, a warm home that they know they're not going to lose, and have some of the other things that go along with being an American citizen, like prom dresses for their daughters to go to the prom, whether they're living in poverty or not.
That's one of the things I love about your organization. As you point out, it kind of, I guess, meets people where they are in terms of a variety of things. Like, who would think a prom dress is an important issue, but boy, is it an important issue, And so if somebody needs help, I guess your approach is you're going to try to help them in some way?
We absolutely will if we possibly can. What we do when somebody comes to us with a need, we find out what their needs are, because sometimes they come to us, maybe their electric bill is overdue and they're about to be losing their power. But then our caseworkers will interview them and find out that they also have a need for some medication coverage, or they're behind on their rent. So we try to fill in all the gaps we can. We have people who come to us with sort of out of the box needs that might not fit another agency. For example, today I answered the door to a woman whose daughter was born with a genetic condition and she needs a very specialized type of wheelchair. So we are working with her to find out how we can cover the cost for that beyond what Medicaid will pay for it, so that her daughter will have what she needs. We've assisted with funeral expenses. We've assisted with gasoline to get to medical appointments and job interviews. And that's one of the things I love. We're a small staff, about 14 staff, but we are very mighty in the ways that we navigate people's problems and help them find solutions that are practical.
And I like what you just said there in terms of navigating their problems and helping with them. Because as you mentioned earlier, who would think that a prom dress would be a thing for a charity?
Yeah.
But it is, and there's, when you think about it, there's probably no other place you can go to. It's not a government-funded, program. And so I've seen that with Eblen over the years, which I think is so cool, that people come to you, and whatever their problem is, if you can, like you said, you're going to try to help them. Describe us the process, Beth, and if somebody is listening or watching or whatever, and they need help, do they go to the office? Do they call up? What's the procedure in terms of working with Eblen?
Well, one of the things that's changed with the pandemic is we don't have open door offices anymore. So people can call, and I encourage them to call or email first. They can reach us at 828-255-3066, or they can visit our website, eblencharities.org. Actually, there's a client resources tab, and they can actually fill out an application and send it by email to us. One of our staff members will call them back. We've had a few people that apply by fax, and then we do have people who stop by, and we do have hard copies of assistance applications on our door, so that if somebody stops by, they can pick up one, either fill it out then and leave it with us, or return it to us later on.
Because remember, that was always one of the things that I thought was cool about Eblen, that before the pandemic, people would just sort of stop by or drop in, and sometimes it'd be kind of crowded, people wanting assistance, but now you prefer them doing it over the phone or by email?
It's safer, to be honest with you. I mean, I definitely heard that there was a lot of people, and a lot of times people waiting for really long periods of time, which meant that they weren't at work, or they were having to find childcare or transportation. And with gasoline costs being what they are, if people are struggling financially, we want them to keep every penny of theirs that they can in their own pocket. So if we can do it by phone or email, we do. But we do have about 15 to 25 people stop by a day, I would say. The other challenge we used to have with the people waiting a long time is that, you'd have a mom with a little kid right next to a person in her 80s who needed help, right next to somebody who was not living in any kind of housing and was having a mental health challenge, all right there together. And we feel that this keeps it a little bit safer, both for our clients and for our staff.
Do you also work with people via Zoom? Do you have any Zoom conversations?
It's not out of the possibility. That's a great, actually, I'm going to take that back to the office tomorrow. That's a great idea.
No, it just seemed, even in terms of the podcast, I used to have people have to come into a radio station, and boy, is it easy, like you and I are talking now, at a convenient time, as opposed to having to come in, park, the whole bit. That's not, parking was never a problem per se, but still, it's the trip there and the gas and whatnot. So that's a real service. So just food for thought. It might be something to play
I
with
like it.
if people
It's a
want
great
it,
idea.
And what you said is kind of interesting too, that I guess it's an adjustment that times do change. And one of the things I guess you're trying to do with Eblen is you're trying to change with the times, so whatever you can do to best reach people. You mentioned too that you have something upcoming. I mean, I shouldn't say something upcoming because with you, you always have something upcoming. You never have something not upcoming. But you mentioned something's coming up now that you're working
Yeah,
on.
we're really gearing up for our busy season. Later this month, we're going to be doing our winter clothing giveaway, and that is October 18th, 19th, and 20th. People can come get a winter jacket or scarves or hats free of charge, both for themselves and their kids. And we want to make sure that everybody's got at least some warm clothing to walk away with.
Now, talk about that, yeah, if you can. So on that one, so are these new items or gently used items?
No, they're gently used items. You mentioned you saw us on WLS. So in the spring, we did a winter coat, like a closet clean out.
Right.
Took all of those, sorted through them, got rid of the ones that maybe weren't in good condition or weren't clean. But we've got a great collection of children, women, and men's clothing available now, but they are all gently used.
I'll throw out an idea, and knowing you probably do it already. But years ago, I helped a local charity was in New Jersey with a homeless shoe drive. When they bring in clothes, do you accept shoes also, or is that something?
And it's primarily because of storage. One of our challenges is our space is really limited. But I do like that idea a lot.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, but it's no longer so. We used to do it with a friend of mine who had a shoe repair business, but you don't see too many shoe repair businesses anymore.
That's true.
So your point is well taken. That's where he did the storage. They were in his shop. But yeah, I'm trying to think to find the shoe repair place. It's not that much anymore. But
that's true.
So the coats. How many coats did you collect approximately?
Oh gosh, thousands.
Really?
Yeah, half a tractor trailer full. Yeah. We were out there from, I think, 5 a.m. till 8 p.m. that night. And then after we took all of those back with, our partners were 2 men in a truck. So they thankfully
very nice.
Put it all in their truck and delivered it for us. But then we had people dropping by for the weeks afterwards with coats and hats and jackets. So it was really great. Our community is wonderfully kind and generous, as you probably know. And we have so many coats and hats and scarves available. It's great.
Also, one of the nice things I think about what you folks do, so if somebody comes and they need a coat or a coat or hat, whatever they need, kind of they get it, right? As opposed to you don't have to go through a lot of red tape to fill in 400 pages of forms and wait 6 months.
No forms at all. You just come on in. We're mainly just tracking to see how many people we serve.
Wow.
And if you come and you think, if you say, like you need to pick one up for your kid or your wife or husband or partner, we let people take as many as they can carry. I mean,
right.
Within reason, I guess, but no paperwork whatsoever.
And what's nice about that, I guess people feel good about it in that it's not going through, you don't make them go through the hoops, to get help. And so that's really nice.
Right.
And treat them, I guess, with the respect, whatnot. If they say it, and I guess that's a good way to look at it. If somebody comes to you for help, you accept them for the word that they need help?
With the coats, yes.
Yeah.
When we're paying people's back due bill, we do require some more information, but absolutely, coats are free, no questions asked. Prom dresses that we give out in the spring, anybody can come get one. In fact, we one of my favorite stories from the prom dress giveaway was that we actually got a bride her dress, and she was there with her parents, and then her mom mentioned she didn't know what she was going to wear. So by the time we were done, the bride had a dress and the mother of the bride had a dress as well.
Oh, is that a great story?
Yeah, and it's it's just really passing through and making it easy for one neighbor to help another.
And it's probably very exciting for people then to be able to know they can go to a prom or even the wedding, whatever. So when the prom, so people then, do you accept donations of prom coats we talked about, prom dresses? That's something you do every year, the prom dresses?
Yep, we usually collect those in the early part of a calendar year. So I would imagine in March we'll start collecting those. And then we have them as a giveaway in April.
So same thing too with your storage. So where do you put all this stuff?
Well, that's our creative plan, our problem that we're constantly working on. So we have a couple of storage units. So when we got done with the proms, we packed them all up, put them in the storage unit, pulled the coats out, set them all up. We'll have the coat giveaway later this month. And when we're done with that, we'll pack what we have left up into our storage unit. And then we'll start gearing up for our St. Nicholas project. Because two other events that we have this year, we'll do a Thanksgiving meal giveaway to about 800 families in November. But then right after Thanksgiving is over, we open up our St. Nicholas Project store. And that is a retail setting full of new toys and teen items and clothing and books. Everything in that store is brand new. And then families can come shop for their children, their teens, their grandkids, so that whatever holiday they celebrate, even if they don't celebrate a holiday, that they have some gifts at the holiday season for when they go back to school in the new year.
And talk about both of those, if you would, Beth. So the first one was the Thanksgiving program.
Yes.
Again, what's the name of it and when does it start?
We call it Giving Thanks at Thanksgiving. And a little later this month, we will start putting signups on our website. It's been a long partnership with Ingalls Markets where
Right.
we band together and they help order all the food. We actually met about this last week when we were planning the meal, turkey and green beans and rolls and that kind of thing. And then 800 families essentially can sign up. There will be a drive-through setting. And by the end of the day, we'll have given out about 800 turkeys and 800 boxes of Thanksgiving food.
I'm glad you mentioned Ingalls because, yeah, they're another great partner because it's really cool that you hear, WLOS, but you also hear about Ingalls, and it's very sweet that they do this, and they're a big supporter of
yes.
yours. So the Thanksgiving is just a drive-through operation. You pack it up and then
We basically will be set up. So once we've had everybody, basically we give them a time to come through when they register. And then it's like they drive through the parking lot at Forest Gate and they'll stop at one station and they'll get their turkey and they'll drive to another station and get the rest of the meal. And then they'll drive off and don't even have to get out of their car.
So that's a whole operation unto itself, though.
Oh, yes. It is. And we'll be looking for volunteers soon. So if your idea of fun is standing outside in the parking lot and giving away free food for a holiday, come and contact us because we'll be happy to use your help.
We'll talk about that, Beth, too, if you would, because I'll just share a quote I have. It's one of my favorite quotes by a woman by the name of Shirley Chisholm. And I see it on my wall here. She was a woman who ran for first African-American woman to run for president. Amazing woman. And it reminds me of you folks. She would say service is the rent we pay for living on earth, and that's what you I guess you're all about. And so great segue to talk about the fact that if people want to get involved and they're looking for a place to help, Eblen welcomes them with open arms.
Absolutely.
How does one become a volunteer?
Well, the easiest way would be to go to our website, eblencharities.org. And I think there's a tab that is called How You Can Help. And if you click on that, one of my fabulous staff members is named Julie Johnson, and she's the coordinator for our volunteers. And she'll ask you, what do you want to do? Do you want to come and help in the office and answer the phone? Do you want to come for an event? A lot of times businesses and schools will contact her to do kind of a service day. We just had Christ School out 2 weeks ago. In fact, Christ School and the Asheville School were both out in the last 2 weeks setting up the coats for our coat giveaway. So we can take both groups and individuals. And if it's an individual, we'll do a little bit more questioning about what interests you might have. But a lot of times groups just want to come out for a day of service. So we'll plug them into our St. Nicholas Project store or our Thanksgiving meal giveaway. We have plenty of projects to plug people into.
Is there an age limit?
No, you can be any age, 150 if you want to be. Younger than 18, we have some specialized forms for you to fill out. Generally, we work with some younger kids. We just try to assess the scenario for safety. For instance, when we were doing our coat drive, we had some high school students that came and helped us collect coats and then set them up. But I know we've had other events where little people, like much smaller people, are there with their parents or a guardian they can work together.
Anybody under 5 feet tall? The little
Yes.
people? Okay, so
Yeah.
even if you're small, there's a place for you. But talk a little bit about, too, Beth, the fact that what people tell you when they volunteer, it's just, it's people say that they get oftentimes more out of it than the people they're helping. Describe some of the reactions you hear when people come in to volunteer, and how do they feel about it?
I think I mentioned that my first step into the nonprofit world was working with volunteers. And I've heard that saying over and over again. I get more out of this than I give. It is a blessing to me to be able to do this. I love having something meaningful to do. I've worked with lots of retired people, both at Eblen and other organizations that, went from having a highly structured schedule when they were working full time. And suddenly they have all this time and it loses its meaning because it's not filled with things that divide it and that give them purpose. So we have a lot of volunteers that are, retired educators, retired social workers, folks that used to do a lot of good in their professional working life. And they're retired, they want to still continue to be feeling part of something that's bigger than themselves. When we did our schools, we did a school supply giveaway in August, and that was another one where we spent one day out there just with Ingalls gathering school supplies from all kinds of people. And there were so many people who would just pull up and hand us a bag full of backpacks that were brand new. And they would say, my grandkids, they're all adults. I don't have anybody little to shop for anymore. This brought me joy.
Oh, right.
And the same thing when they were out, we had the Asheville Hotel Group come out and volunteer with us, and Kimmel and Associates that came out and volunteered with us when we were doing our school supply giveaway. They said it just felt great to be part of something that they knew was going to stay in their community and make somebody else's life a little bit better. And I think, we're living in weird times. It's been a very tumultuous, life. But really, last few years have been really hard, I think, on American citizens. And there's so many things that are meant to divide us. But I really believe that most people have a lot more in common than they don't. And I think one of the things that most people have in common is that they want to help. We are social creatures. We're interdependent. We want to give back as much as we want to receive. And related to that, again, we help lots of people in poverty. And we always get lots of sweet thank you notes from people who were like, I just needed a little bit of help and you gave it to me. Thank you. We get $20 bills in the mail sometimes that said, you helped me when I needed it and I just want to pay it forward. So I think people want to help. I think that the volunteers that work with us or with other nonprofits feel like they're part of something that's important and meaningful and fun. Most of the time it's fun as well.
And what's interesting from what I hear you saying is that people don't have to also wait for a holiday. Some people think, you probably get inundated maybe Christmas time. Everybody wants to help at Christmas time. But hey, all throughout the year, there are people in need of help. So you don't have to wait till 1 week, Thanksgiving or Christmas. You can come anytime.
Exactly.
You'll take them to see you.
Exactly. We're happy. We have a lot of things to keep people busy. If you want to come and volunteer with us regularly, you can come to our office, help us answer the phone, answer the door. You can, if you like more hands-on stuff, we have a group of volunteers that come and they're setting up the coat giveaway. So it looks nice and clean and professional. And as soon as the coats are given away, we'll pack those up and get ready for the next thing. So there's a lot of different possibilities for people who want to volunteer.
And by the way, you're giving a good bit of advice, maybe for high school seniors or college students as well. You want to get some experience. What a great way to get experience in a variety, you name it. It sounds like you'll put them to work in some fashion or another, So
Absolutely.
It's in addition to working for a company, you can also work for a nonprofit or volunteer for a nonprofit as well. We also, I guess, coming up, I'm looking at the calendar here. We have an event coming up at October 12th. It's at Carrier Park. What's that event?
October 29th.
29th, I'm sorry.
It is our walk, run, or roll. It is a fun run 5K at Carrier Park, and it's a fundraiser for our organization. It's $30 to enter, and everybody who entered, we're encouraging people to come in costume because it's 2 days before Halloween.
Cool.
And we're encouraging people to bring their well-behaved dogs in costume as well. So every dog that participates will get a treat. And every human who participates will get entered into a bunch of giveaways. We have some really great prizes. And it's a nice flat course. It's in West Asheville in Carrier Park. And then all the funds that we raise will go towards our work, helping people in the community.
Have you done this before, this event?
We have done it, but it has been several years since we've had it because of the pandemic. And this is the first time, I believe, with costumes and dogs.
Okay, very cool. So if you can, do we know yet your costume, or is that a secret? They'll have to come that day.
I actually have a fuzzy fuzzy unicorn onesie that if it's chilly, I'll just zip right up, pull it over, and my friends who know me really well. In fact, one of my friends gave me this costume, has known for a long time that I've loved unicorns since I was a teenager. And I've followed a blogger named Vu Lee, who's a thought leader in the nonprofit world. And for a long time, he's called his organization the Nonprofit Unicorn. So I feel
I
like,
I love
it's
it.
fitting I wear my unicorn outfit for that day.
Okay, but what's nice about it too, I mean, that just sounds like a fun event too, so um, you know, you do very serious work, very good work, but it doesn't always have to be, it's sometimes just nice to put a smile on people's face too. So this is the event as well. Now talk about it. People want to sign up for that. They sign up in advance. What do they do?
Yeah, in fact, if they want to sign up for that, they should sign up by the end of this week to guarantee that they get a T-shirt for it. Then go to our website, eblencharities.org, and information is right there. Just a couple of clicks and you can register. It's $30 a person. Dogs are free. And like I said, we're hoping for great weather and a fun day. I agree. The world's a serious place. We have serious problems, but we can certainly have a lot of fun while we're going about solving them.
Okay, and just seeing you, it's just great to see your smile. It's nice to put a smile on people's faces too, or, just as you're describing it, I can just see it. Somebody gets a jacket, they need the jacket or the prom dress or something. What about guys, by the way? Guys are overlooked, I think, Beth, sometimes, that. So the women
Yeah.
have the dresses, but so we don't help out guys per se, or they're on their own.
Well, one of the things we've been talking about is reaching out to some groups to see about tuxes. And potentially some tux rentals, because I agree, and I know that not every young woman wants to wear a dress,
Right.
So if they want to wear a suit, we're working on that as well. We haven't quite solved it yet. Tuxes are a little bit more specific, I guess.
But no offense, Beth, to the tux industry, but I never quite got that. In other words, that you want to have a party at the end of the year or sometime, that's great, but you don't have to spend mega bucks for a dress or gown or a tuxedo. To me, it was just such a, I was kind of a waste that, that's an expenditure could be spent a lot better ways. Have people dress up nicely, but you don't have to wear a gown or, my opinion, but people still want it. So, I guess that's the rite of passage to go to your high school prom or something.
It is, yeah.
But they don't ask me. Talk about, Beth, then, as we kind of wind down here, how would you describe it? Is there an average client or person who comes to Eblen, or can you generalize it?
We help a lot of different kinds of people. We help a lot of single parents raising kids on one income. We help a lot of married parents whose income just is not adequate for what the cost of living is in this area. We also help a lot of older people. So people who might be retired and living on Social Security or a pension and have a very tight budget. And then, a little bit in between everybody. We've helped people who were previously without any housing get into housing. We've helped, and that, homelessness, anybody can be homeless. But I'd say for the most part, we're either helping parents with children or people who are over the age of 65.
And again, I think one of the nice things about Eblen Charities is, to me, you almost seem like a one-stop shopping service. And I've heard that in terms of people coming in to make appointments. You can point them in many different directions, whereas many other nonprofits in the Asheville area, they all do good work, but they're very singular. You can only go for housing, or you can only go for food or whatever. And so you kind of, I guess, put it all together, or try to help people put it all together if you can.
Well, and what if you're in crisis, like if you're worried
Right.
that your power is going to be turned off or you're about to lose your home, think about how stressful that is. And then think about having to be reaching out to 12 different charities to see if any of them can help you. So we are, we put on our website this year a client resource guide so that, they can go to our website and click on it and see some of the other agencies that are out there. That's always going to be updated because things are changing constantly. We're trying to make sure that we have really strong working relationships with other nonprofits like Helpmate or Pisgah Legal Services or other agencies that are serving similar populations, and to make sure that they know that we're here to help as well. Because, if you're in crisis, you want to be surrounded by support. And I think one of the things that's neat about Eblen is we have a lot of different ways that we can provide support because our mission is broad.
I'm thinking out loud here, not that you need something else to get involved in your spare time, but has there ever been I'm thinking out loud, a nonprofit fair or a fair or someplace where you could see, all the organizations at one time, that at the mall or Christmas or something, it'd just be 10
And
tables.
the events like that, and
Right,
sometimes they're focused on volunteerism,
right.
sometimes they're focused on a particular type of charitable work. I I haven't seen one of those in several years, and I'm going to
Yeah,
guess that maybe the pandemic
well, sure.
put a break on some of those.
Because it would be neat, just that there is this one-stop shopping place. But Eblen is probably closest to it because, again, they come in, make the appointment, and you're going to point them in 5 different areas as well.
Mm-hmm.
Beth Russo, so again, to recap, if folks want to get in touch with Eblen Charities, what are the best ways?
Well, the easiest way to go to our website, eblencharities.org. If you go to that website, you can go to the bottom of the page and you can follow us on social media. We're active on Instagram and Facebook. You can also click on the website to join our newsletter, which goes out monthly and kind of gives you a lot of the information we discussed today. Those are probably the easiest ways to get in touch with us.
Okay. I'd like to thank you for being my guest this first half hour on the Blaine's World podcast. It was a pleasure. And thank you for all the good work that you do, but Eblen Charities does, because again, to your credit, you folks have a really good reputation. I think it's well deserved. So thank you for everything you do.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here today. It was a pleasure to talk with you.
Okay. Best to your husband then. That was neat. Okay, great.
I'll tell.
Thanks. Thanks, Todd. See you, Beth. Okay, so
Bye.
as Beth kind of works her way out of the studio where I kick her out, we'll bring in our next guest, and he is Randy Warren. And Randy, if you're there, he is. Perfect timing. Hey, Randy. As Randy kind of works his way into the studio, where out of his mountain retreat there, I should mention that you're listening to the Blaine's World podcast. You're also watching us, and we're on Spotify, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, you name it, you can find us. My second guest today is Randy Warren. And Randy, you can wave to all your fans and friends in the Facebook world or on LinkedIn, Spotify, who's watching you here. But Randy, I should mention, has been a cycling coach since 1987 and is a bicycle advocate for nearly that long. Currently, he serves as the vice chair of Asheville's Multimodal Transportation Commission and is the representative to the city's Bike and Pedestrian Task Force. He's also president and coach of the Downtown Asheville Racing Club and a current and 3-time national champion who just returned from racing at the Masters World Championships in Italy. And welcome back, Randy.
Thanks, Blaine.
Something. The question is, Randy, I wonder, and I'll think about my background. How old were you when you first rode a bicycle? Do you remember?
Well, like most people, I started when I was a kid, and that was a way to get around the neighborhood and just to play with other friends and things like that too. So I started when I was real young. And then in my college years, a friend and I watched Breaking Away, and we thought that was just such a fun movie that we actually had a housemate who had an Italian father, and he didn't speak Italian, but his father did. So we said, Roland, get your dad to teach us some phrases. So we learned 4 or 5 Italian phrases that we could shout at each other as we rode our bikes in college. And then I wrestled in high school and college, and then I was a runner after that. And then as I had deteriorating knees, even in my mid-20s, I started riding more. And once I started riding a bicycle, I had a lot of success right away, and I started coaching right away, and just have been doing that ever since.
By the way, thanks for the recommendation. I'm going to jot it down. I have to see that film again. I haven't seen it for too many years.
It's a great movie. It actually won the Academy Award for Best Screenplay the year it came out. So it's a good movie.
So that's one of your favorite films of all time. We'll talk about something you just said. It's kind of interesting. So that bike riding then is, even if you have bad knees, is something you can do?
Yeah, actually, it's oftentimes recommended as a rehab for people who are athletes who can't maybe run or do other things. You're even skiing, people that have had skiing injuries or things like that too, because it's not the same kind of weight-bearing activity that running is, for example. And so it's oftentimes used for rehabilitation for people who are doing other sports. And then once they start riding a bicycle, they oftentimes will then develop a love for cycling. And so we've had some of our best cyclists have transferred from other sports because they were using it as a rehab, realized they loved it. And if they were already an athlete, maybe they have a natural propensity for being a cyclist too, and then have gone on to be a good cyclist.
What got you into competitive cycling?
Well, I've always been competitive, so I've always been involved in sports. I've never hadn't done some kind of sport. And when one great thing about cycling is that after you get out of college, even if you're a college athlete, a lot of times you can't do whatever you're doing. So I really couldn't wrestle anymore. I couldn't run track, although I could do, running road running events and stuff too. But cycling, I just turned 60 this year, and I was at World Championships a couple of weeks ago, and the oldest person at the World Championships was 85 years old. And so you can do it really as long as you can get around. Some people even have trouble maybe walking, but if they can get on the bike, then they can still have fun on the bike. If not competitively, you can just enjoy being on a bike.
And I've even seen that too, Randy, as you mentioned, with people with Parkinson's, that I guess the repetitive nature of it. Have you seen that or heard that? That's very good for people with Parkinson's?
Yeah, so a lot of times what happens when you're a kid, so it's ideally most people learn how to ride a bike as a kid, and so they develop the neuromuscular pathways that are
Right.
needed to pedal. And so then still sometimes the same thing with singing, like people that have trouble maybe with a stammer or a stutter, if they sing, they can do that without stammering or stuttering because it's activating different parts of their brain to use the singing. So same thing with riding a bicycle. If you have previously learned how to ride a bicycle, once you get on it, then you're activating those neuromuscular pathways you developed a long time ago. And oftentimes people who might have trouble holding their hands steady can ride a bicycle without any problem.
So you're saying if I take up cycling again, I'll be able to sing again, and I can start singing and doing it at the same
If,
time?
if you ride your bicycle, you'll want to sing because you're having so much fun.
Well, we're laughing about it, but let me ask you on the other end, do people get into cycling at a later age? In other words, that haven't done cycling all their life, and all of a sudden at the age 60, 70, they start cycling?
Sure. So as part of my coaching business, I have one-on-one relationships with athletes where I coach them individually. And I had a gentleman who started riding at age 70. So he was a business owner and he sold his business. And then he was looking to do things he hadn't done during his business career. And one of them is he wanted to be an athlete, and he loved riding a bike many, 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 many years ago. And he's a kid, and he thought, well, maybe this is something I want to do. And at first he had trouble doing almost anything like standing up to ride, or he couldn't sprint because he wanted to be competitive. So he worked at it really hard for a number of years, and then he ended up winning quite a few state senior games championships and was very successful.
So you're saying there's no age, it's too old to start cycling. What if you never even, as a kid, cycled? You never rode a
Well, it
bike?
is harder then. And actually, so I lived in Chicago for 15 years, and we actually had a program where we would teach people who are adults to ride a bicycle, because if you hadn't developed those neuromuscular pathways, sometimes it's a little harder to, it just doesn't come as naturally. And so you can definitely do it, but it does take something that you have to practice at.
And what about learning to ride a bike? You're giving me ideas here. In terms of using a stationary bike, how does that translate?
Sure. I mean, some people just ride stationary bikes. I did a bike fit this last weekend on somebody who just wanted they have a fit on their spin cycle. And so that was pretty unusual, but that's where they like to ride their bicycle. And actually riding indoors has become much more popular now, partly because of the pandemic, but also because now they have these trainers, we call them, that you can put your bicycle on and you can interact with people around the world on their bicycles.
Right.
And
That,
so
yeah.
there's a video that you connect up to online, and people log in from around the world. And there's tens of thousands of people sometimes who will even ride together at these bigger events. And it's a lot of fun. So people ride sometimes primarily inside. So it's becoming very popular.
Have you ever done that in terms of riding
Oh,
inside and with others?
sure. Yeah. Actually, right now I'm currently the esports national champion, because I race. So I'm 60, like I said, but I have a teammate and a team that I still race virtually with in Chicago, and they're one of the world's best riders, a female rider. And so we've kind of built a team around her. And so they said they wanted me to help be on the team. And I said, at 60, I'm racing against, 20, 30-year-old pro guys. So I'm not going to do very well, but they said, that's fine. We just need somebody there and ride. So I got some experience with that. And then when I raced against people my own age, I was able to win the national championship, because I was used to getting my butt handed to me with these pros, but it certainly made me much better. So I've done, a significant amount of it. And during the pandemic, I actually used to lead some classes too online, where people would log on to Instagram and they would watch me as I conducted a class on live, and then they would connect up virtually through a Strava program, or not Strava, but a different kind of online platform.
So describe the process so that you can be at your home then, and you're saying they have something you can, a stationary device, or just you're riding your bike and it stays in one place. Is that the idea? behind it?
Sure. Yeah. You need, for most of these, you need something that records that you're moving. So either a
Right.
speed sensor or a power meter or something like that. And it could be on a number of different types of trainers, but they have some of these trainers are very specific and they do an amazing job at simulating riding in real life. And so if the course starts to go uphill, then it'll increase the resistance on the trainer. And if you go downhill, it releases some of the resistance. And some of them even have fans that will blow harder when you're going faster and not as hard. And then some of them have ones that'll raise the front of your bike up a little bit when you're climbing a hill and lower it when you're going down. So I don't have those, but I do have the kind of trainer that will give you more or less resistance to mimic whatever kind of course you're looking at online.
I was going to say, do they have some of them have something that spits water into your face? So if you want to see what it's like raining, you know, you can get the whole experience.
Well, you don't actually feel the rain, but some of the courses do have you riding through rain. So oftentimes if I'm riding inside on a day, it'll be because maybe it's raining outside here and it's a cold, dreary day. And then I'm always disappointed when I get onto the virtual environment and see that it's cold and rainy there too. I said, I'm trying to avoid that. I don't want to see it online too.
And you have to wear a winter coat or you know, not a winter coat, but you wear a jacket.
You
That's
get pretty
funny.
hot actually because you're not moving and the wind blowing by you cools you off a lot. And so you have to have fans to cool you down. So I have two fans, one that faces in front of the bike and blows air up into me, and then one that's more at face level on the side too. So the cooling aspect is pretty important. And it's amazing what people have set up. So again, in these pro races, people have sometimes even ice in front of the cooler, you know, the fans to cool them down more. And they've got, you know, the sound systems to play music to motivate them when they're riding. And it's all sorts of different things to create an environment that makes you want to ride.
She reminds me, Randy, a couple of years ago, I was participating in a walkathon for a dementia group, and you had to wear a Fitbit or something on your wrist, and it wasn't set up very well, to the contrary to what you're describing. So you'd be in a car, so everybody would have like 2 to 5 miles a day, and it registered when you were in the car. So I would come in, I had like 35 miles a day, you know, they couldn't believe how I was doing it. So I guess it's the system is the key to it, you know, if it's legitimate. But
Yeah, there's much more sophisticated ones. Actually, for the pro race ones, you have to weigh yourself, videotape yourself, or
oh,
video yourself weighing yourself because the power to weight ratio is really important. And then you also have to calibrate your power meter, and you have to video yourself doing that too. So in the pro races, they're very specific to make sure that no one's cheating.
well, I was going to ask you that. Almost like they cheat in chess now. You read about that. So I guess people. I digress. I just read about a fishing tournament, and I don't know if you heard it was on the news today. And they were cheating in a fishing tournament. The guys who were catching the fish weighted the fish. You know, they put in extra weight. So I guess in anything, people will try to beat the system, but it's kind of hard to do so if the system is run well.
They try and make it as hard as possible. I mean, unfortunately, cycling has a history of people cheating, and in
Yeah.
almost any sport, I think, too, the same thing. And so, actually, one woman who came out of nowhere last year in Germany, and she was beating this woman on my team, who's, you know, Jackie Godby. She's one of the best in the world, and all of a sudden, this woman is beating her. And so, people thought it seemed kind of funny. And so, then some people launched an investigation saying, we don't know, we don't see any history of her being this good before. And then eventually, they found out that she was cheating, and they disqualified her because she, you know, she had to prove that she could do what she was showing online, and she couldn't do it.
Well, you know, you're saying it, but it's so sad in a way because cycling had become so popular, you know, X number of years ago. Lance Armstrong, it was such a great story, and it became very popular as a result of Lance Armstrong's work. And what a shame because, you know, it was such a great story, you know, that he was able to overcome cancer and whatnot, but he was cheating most of the time, I guess. You know, it's
Yeah, unfortunately, my wife actually worked in oncology at the time, and so many patients she would see would be inspired by Lance's story,
right.
and nobody wanted to believe that he was cheating, but he was, and there was, you know, a lot of cheating in the sport, and there is a lot of sports too, and actually, people oftentimes will associate cheating with cycling because they'll say, oh, there's a bunch of drug users and things like that too, but cycling has done an awful lot to try and clean itself up. And there's not a really strong riders union, for example, that can push back against that. Where if you look at a lot of other professional sports that have unions
I was
for,
going to say that, sure.
right, baseball, football, basketball, hockey, whatever it is, you know, they actually push back against testing a lot. And so they don't have the same kind of efforts a lot of times to catch the people who are cheating as maybe cycling does. So cycling is cleaned up a lot. We don't pretend that nobody cheats because there's always ways to cheat, but we try and keep it as clean as possible. And, you know, even at, you know, the world championships I went to where there were for age groups, so not just the professionals, but age groups, they even have testing there. So if you win a race and you cheat at that level, you're going to get caught.
Well, in testing, I'm asking kind of laughing at the reason I'm asking it, but the testing, is that blood tests or urine samples, or what is it?
So they can do blood tests, but usually it's urine samples at the race itself. But there's out of competition tests they'll do too, and that can sometimes be a blood sample.
Yeah, because that's why I can never do cycling, because I don't do well with blood tests. So, that'd be my
Yeah.
excuse for not being a competitive
You
cyclist.
have to agree to get the test for sure if you're at that level. Yeah.
Talk about your work too, Randy. What got you to become a cycling coach?
Sure. Well, I've always been kind of an intellectual athlete. And so I like the aspect of the sport where, and I think part of it's because I'm not a super good natural athlete. And so in order to excel, I've had to look at everything I can do to maximize my potential. And so in that, I really learned a lot about the intricacies of the sport. So whether it was, wrestling or running or playing baseball or whatever. And so when I started working at the University of Redlands in California, I moved from Michigan to California. And there were some of my residents, I was a resident director who wanted to race, and they had they rode their bikes and they just wanted to participate in collegiate racing, and we didn't have a team. So they knew I was a good athlete and I was starting to race and winning a lot of races, and they asked me to coach the team then. And so I was fortunate enough to get to go to the Olympic Training Center at a camp there in Colorado Springs, and they taught me a whole lot of specific things about cycling. So I knew a lot about athletics, nutrition, and everything like that, but to learn a lot about the specific things for cycling, this camp was fantastic for that. And so I learned a lot really quickly, and I was doing pretty well myself. And so I just started coaching this team, and I always thought I might like coaching, and this worked out great because it would match my passion. I could still ride my bike. I could ride with my athletes. That kind of makes me a little bit unusual. A lot of coaches who are my age aren't racing their bikes anymore. That's long past, their history, but I still do the races with my athletes. So I'll be at a race with them and I can know what the course was like because I experienced it too. And I can say, hey, you really got to watch out for this corner. At this point in the course, you have to do this because I'm doing it with them.
Now, when you mentioned the coaching, you mentioned in-person coaching. Is some of this done virtually as well?
Sure. A lot of times I'll have athletes who might even be around the United States or even occasionally around the world. And so there's programs online where you can actually see what they're doing. They enter their data, usually from a cyclometer, on the bike. And then I can look at their data and then we talk about what they're doing. And so I can give them a lot of feedback, even if I don't see them in person. So occasionally I'll have very little contact with some athletes. They might be just someplace that, in the country that I just don't get to very often. And so it'll be relying heavily on what I see online and talking to them, but we can still make a lot of good progress with that. But being in person with the athletes are even better. So sometimes I do camps where we'll get together for 4 days to 8 days and ride together in a group environment. And that way I can really give more one-on-one feedback, seeing them actually doing things too. So I try and mix it up so I get to see the people sometimes, even if they don't live in the area.
Now, do you also work with people, you mentioned, on a one-on-one basis? Do any of your camps have work with people who have done no cycling or very little cycling in their life?
I don't really have camps that do that. So most of my camps are for people who are trying to either get a lot of miles in or prepare for specific events or things like that. So I have had some athletes who were relatively new to cycling and working with them on a one-on-one or a clinic based. So especially when I lived in Chicago, I used to do a lot of clinics, and some of them are just basic skills. So even if you're an experienced cyclist, you still should probably be brushing up on some of those basic skills. But if you're a beginner, those things can be essential. Just learning how to clip in and stop and turn and things like that. It's important to learn those the appropriate way. Otherwise, you might just be dangerous to yourself and others.
You mentioned before one of the older cyclists you work with. What's the age range of cyclists you work with?
So the oldest I have right now, I think I was 60. Well, I was 70-year-old right now, actually. So up to 70. I have a couple guys in their 60s too. And then my youngest one right now is 22. But I often have worked with junior cyclists too. So our program here in Asheville, we have Asheville Youth Cycling, which is part of downtown Asheville Racing Club. And we have some juniors there that we're trying to become more involved with. And so we're going to start doing some gravel/mountain bike rides just this next month. And just to have people getting on the bike and having fun at a younger age.
Now, when they work with you, is the goal, in some cases, I guess, to enter competitive events and win them and do as well as they can? But sometimes people just want to cycle in for health reasons or just to stay out in the fresh air?
Sure. Yeah, actually, I have one athlete right now who just wants to do weight control. So there's somebody who struggled with their weight. And so we primarily just work on making sure they're at an activity level that they're able to maintain their weight or lose some weight. And then we also work on nutrition some too, and just healthy living in general. So I have everybody from that to people who have gone in the past to the Olympics or World Championships.
How about cycling as a way to recover from injuries?
Sure. I don't have specifically too many people I do that with. That's more like a physical therapist kind of role, but I do have physical therapists that I work with that might refer someone to me saying, I want this person to do some therapy and riding would be a good way to do that. Could you help them with the riding? So I'm not so much helping with the injury rehab, but just helping them with the cycling, which is a part of the rehab.
And talk about cycling now. We'll kind of bring it to the local scene. I'll ask, I don't know if it's a naive question, but the two things that come to mind in cycling are both weather and safety. Let's take both. So in terms of ideal weather, I guess Asheville in a lot of respects is pretty good in terms of if you want to cycle. It's a pretty good place to cycle at.
Sure.
You know,
Actually, so
yeah.
I would say the weather, I mean, is pretty darn good here. So like I said, I used to live in Chicago, and there it gets pretty darn cold in the winter, but I never missed a day of commuting when I worked downtown due to weather. So I rode as low as minus 18 degrees and
And you would
a lot.
commute to work
Yeah,
on a
yeah.
bike?
So yeah, by bicycle. Every day that I went in the office, I would be on the bike. And I said, like I said, down to 18 degrees below zero was my coldest commute that I saw. But a lot of it's just a matter of wearing the right clothing, having fenders on your bike for snow or rain, and just being ready to prepare for the elements. Here we also have the added element of topography. So having hills and descents changes things up. In Chicago, it was all flat. And so if you dressed at the beginning of the ride, you would be comfortable the whole time because you wouldn't have to work harder up a hill or coast down a hill. So when you coast down and you're wet from sweat, sometimes you might get chilly. So you need to have clothes that you can unzip, let the air, come from your heat generating, escape, up a hill, and then you can zip it back up when you come down a hill, for example, too. So you definitely can do it, but there's a learning curve in terms of what types of clothing and things you can do. And you look at places like, in many places in Europe, the Netherlands or Denmark or in Germany or places like that, or even England a lot now too. It rains a lot in a lot of those places, and yet people still ride their bikes all the time. So if you have, like I said, fenders or a rain jacket, a lot of times you can ride pretty comfortably even in the rain.
Where snow, though, is a little bit harder.
Snow's a little harder. A lot of times we ask people to have like some kind of tires that have more of a tread on them. So a lot of times tires don't have much of a tread, but if you have snow, you can definitely ride through it. It's a little tougher here again in Asheville because there's places that might have ice that maybe don't see the sunshine because of the hills or the woods or things like that. So that's a whole nother ball of wax. If you're gonna have ice, you need to have really tires that would have studs on them or things like that. And not many people have that. So my wife, who commutes to Mission Hospital every day to work, she won't ride if it's going to be icy just because she has to go down a hill from her house and then up a hill to the hospital. And so she just chooses not to ride those days. And I don't blame her whatsoever. Even if it's icy, for me to do a training ride, a lot of times I might choose to do one of those indoor rides instead. But again, in Asheville, we don't have that many days that are icy either.
I was going to say, exactly. Yeah, first year here 15 years ago, terrible winter, but since then, you have very few black ice days, or, when you think about it. But talk again about Asheville. So my other thing that comes to mind is that I see some people riding on bikes, and it seems somewhat dangerous, and I want to talk to you a little bit about that. In terms of, I'll just throw out the one place we're on, sometimes you go to the Parkway, okay? What's Asheville doing to make biking, I guess, or cycling safer for people?
Well, a lot of times, I mean, just American culture is really a car culture. I mean,
Right.
years and years and years ago, before cars even existed, they started paving roads for bicycles. So it used to be horses and then bicycles, and they started paving roads to make it easier to cycle. And a lot of times people don't understand that too. Car drivers a lot of times feel like, hey, bikes don't have a place on the road. But in reality, I mean, there's so many things that bikes have a benefit to being part of traffic. I mean, it reduces emissions from vehicles. It puts less vehicles on the road, which is, a bicycle is much smaller than a car. So if you take out 10 cars and replace it with 10 bikes, it's about
Sure.
the same space as one car, So certainly there's a lot of advantages for having people on a bike. But we don't have many facilities here for bicycles, and we're kind of behind in that. And part of the thing with Asheville growing over the many years, they've taken 2-lane roads and squeezed 4 lanes into them.
Right.
And so there isn't much room for even the cars, let alone bicycles. And in some places now we're kind of going back to putting, instead of 4 lanes, 3 lanes. So 2 lanes of traffic, one in each direction, plus a turn lane in the middle. And then we have room for bike lanes. And a lot of people feel comfortable with different types of facilities. So sometimes a bike lane is just a stripe on the road. They don't really feel any more comfortable, where other people feel perfectly fine without a bike lane at all. And other people want to have separated bike lanes, like we have on Riverside Drive through the River Arts District now, the Wilma Greenway. And so we try and have facilities as much as we possibly can for every type of user. And so as the city is looking to build more greenways, we're looking to have more options where it's completely separated from traffic, but also places where we can just have more bike lanes. And so that provides a level of comfort for some people. And then we have these things called share arrows, or just, again, arrows on the road saying bikes are allowed in this area, and this is kind of where they would be. So different people have different comfort levels, and we try and accommodate those as much as we can.
I know it's like the controversy in Asheville was on Merriman Avenue is switching. They're switching
Sure.
from, what, 4 lanes to, what are they doing?
To 3 lanes there too. So it's much like the Charlotte Street, where Charlotte Street went from a 4-lane configuration to 2 lanes, again, one in each direction, plus a center turn lane, and then bike lanes. And a lot of people are just afraid of change, and it's different, and nobody wants more congestion. And so they think that if they take away 2 lanes of traffic, it'll be more congested. Where in actuality, if we look around the country and around the world, we see that usually a 4-to-3 conversion will move traffic just as well. In the 3-lane configuration is 4 lanes. Because on Merriman, with the 4 lanes, you oftentimes see people turning left from the second
Right.
lane and they back up traffic, or people trying to get in from driveways in the right lane too, and that can slow things down. And so having the 2 lanes actually can make it safer in many ways. One thing is we want traffic to go at a reasonable speed. Asheville, unfortunately, has a really it's this highest or second highest place in North Carolina in terms of pedestrian crashes, for example, and bike
Right, I've seen
crashes.
that.
So we want to try and do things to make it safer for everybody. And so having cars go faster is not usually a good idea, because there's, the severity of injuries goes up exponentially with the rate of speed. So if we can just have people go slower, but continue to move at a decent rate, maybe a car might be delayed for 10, 15, 20 seconds, but if it makes things safe enough that someone won't get hit by a car, it's well worth that.
Talk about a safety factor from both the driving standpoint and the being a cyclist standpoint. So if you are riding a cycle, what are some of the things that can make it a safer experience for you?
Sure. So a lot of times bicyclists get accused of not obeying traffic laws, and,
Right.
and that can be a big issue. And unfortunately, cars don't obey traffic laws a lot of times too. And the consequences of a car not, stopping at a 4-way stop, for example, is much more severe than a bicycle. But really, everybody should follow traffic laws. So we always say that the bicycle shouldn't take away the right of way from anybody. So sometimes people say, well, you should put your foot down at a 4-way stop. But if there's nobody at that 4-way stop, it probably isn't necessary. But it is necessary for the bicyclist still to slow down to a point that they could stop if they need to, and look and make sure that nobody's coming in any of those other directions. And if they are, and someone else has the right of way, they should never take that away. And they should be using hand signals. They should have lights on them when it's dark. And actually, most cyclists ride with at least a tail light all the time, because it's easier to see them, and wearing bright clothing and things like that. We shouldn't put everything just on the cyclist to be safe. They should do things safely, but car drivers need to be more aware of other people on the roads too, whether it's a bicyclist or a pedestrian who's crossing a street. Or, I mean, in my neighborhood, I live in Buena Vista neighborhood, we don't have sidewalks. We walk our dogs and walk with our kids and our neighbors and stuff on the streets. And so people that drive in this neighborhood drive really slowly, because they know they're going to see their neighbors walking around on the street. And so that makes it a more friendly place when everybody, in a safer place, when people drive at appropriate speed, so that you can ride your bike or walk your dog or whatever, and everybody can be safe.
I never thought about it from a safety standpoint, but in terms of speed bumps, I think about them in terms of cars, but probably also if you're riding a bike, probably not a fun thing either.
Actually, a bike can usually get over a speed bump pretty easily. Speed bumps, unfortunately, is the thing you do as a last resort, or sometimes people do as a first resort.
Right,
But
exactly.
it's when you can't get people to obey the speed limits, when they just won't do it, then you figure other ways to try and do that. And so one way is putting a speed bump in. But really, as a bicycle advocate, we wish that people wouldn't have to put speed bumps in to slow people down. If people just followed the rules of the road again, they wouldn't need speed bumps. But it's because people refuse to go the appropriate speed that people put in speed bumps.
Teach me the answer to the question I raised before, that if I'm driving on the parkway especially, and I see bikes in front of me, what's the best way to, like if they're looking at, I guess, the mirror, they're seeing us, but you want to make them aware, do you honk? Or honk scares them? Or what's the way to approach a two narrow lane road and you see a bike in front of you, what's the best way to do this as a driver?
Sure. The parkway is always a challenge because a lot of times parkway drivers think that bikes shouldn't be on there, but really the
Exactly.
parkway is not really, sometimes people use it as a shortcut to get places and things like that, but it's really it's a national roadway and it's meant for people driving slowly. It's a 35-mile-an-hour speed
Right.
limit, throughout Asheville, and people oftentimes don't want to go that slow. And then 45 when you get outside of Asheville, but it's made for people to enjoy the scenery and stuff there too. So I think that's the first thing is this attitude that people have to understand that if they're using it as a shortcut to get someplace, they need to expect drivers to drive slowly or bicyclists to be on it because that's what really it's for. And then to be safe, North Carolina a couple of years ago actually passed a specific law saying that it is legal to pass in a double yellow line as long as it's safe to do so and as long as you give the cyclist 4 feet of room when you pass around them. So if drivers come up on a cyclist and it's a double yellow line, they do have the legal option to pass them, but only if it's safe to do so, and then they give that 4 feet. So generally we don't advise people to honk because that could startle cyclists. Sometimes people do a little teeny beep beep, and most experienced cyclists are okay with that. But if someone maybe isn't quite as experienced, might find that just a little disturbing. But on my bike, actually, I have a little radar unit, so I can tell cars that come up behind me because it'll show it on my bike computer that the cars are coming up. But most of the times, cyclists can hear when cars are coming too. And so they kind of are aware of what's going there. And again, if a cyclist is going to be safe, they're going to try and stay to the right of the road as much as possible. I mean, legally, they could be any place in the roadway, but to be safe, being on the right side of the roadway is a good place to be. And then that allows a car to feel more comfortable to pass them when it's safe to do so. And so the main thing is just cars need to make sure it's safe. A lot of times we see cars all the time passing when we can't see around the corner coming up.
Right.
And we just know it's dangerous to do so. And most of the time too, the car is being delayed again, 10, 15 seconds. It's not very much of a delay, but they get very frustrated sometimes by having any delay at all, and sometimes I feel like I shouldn't have to suffer from your inability to plan to be someplace on time. So if you're late to, a meeting or taking someone to work or school or whatever, and you feel like, this cyclist getting in my way and they're disrupting my being late. But, if society in general planned a little better and took a breath once in a while, I think it'd be safer for everybody.
You're so right, because I know when I go 35 miles an hour, everybody's beeping. They get so annoyed with me because they say I'm slowing down things. I'm just following the speed limit, but people aren't used to it, I guess, on that road. Have you ever ridden on a race on the Parkway?
So not a race. Well, actually, the Salt on Mount Mitchell is
Right.
kind of a race, and it starts down, in Spartanburg, and then it goes up to Marion, and then takes Highway 80 up to the Parkway, and then goes to the base of the Mitchell State Park, and then up the top of that. And I try and do that race every year if I can. Sometimes I'm running a camp during that time period, so I can't do it. But if I can, I will. So that's the only race I've done. But I do run camps on the Parkway where I'll get a permit to take a group on the Parkway. And with that, we're following very specific rules where we have to make sure that we clean up after ourselves if we have rest stops, and we ride in smaller groups, usually 5 to 8 people, and stay to the right of the road. Ride single file, have lights on the Parkway, so when we go through tunnels, things like that too. But it's an amazing resource to have in the area. And so we don't want to go there where it's the busiest time, like during leaf season, for example. We try and stay off the Parkway in the heat of the day. And maybe if we're going to ride the Parkway during the fall, peak season, we'll ride earlier in the morning, or times when maybe it's not quite so busy.
Typically, how fast does a cyclist go? So a normal cycling day.
Well, I mean, it depends. A lot of times if you're just going to downtown to go to the library or something like that too, maybe you're only going 10, 12 miles an hour. And when I used to live in Chicago, for example, if you as a racer didn't average 20 miles an hour on almost any ride, it was slow. But here, the racers are still a lot of times averaging even 16 miles an hour because it's so mountainous. So today I went up Doggett Mountain, for example, and I came back. So it was a 68-mile ride, I think, and I averaged like 17.4 miles an hour, and that would have been slow in a lot of places I lived. But here, because we have so much climbing, your average speed is much slower. But I also went 50 miles an hour on one stretch of the road too. So it depends on the wind and uphill or downhill, things like that.
I'll let you give kind of a public service recommendation or announcement, but talk about something so basic that I learned the hard way many years ago. A buddy of mine was cycling, and he had a heart attack. But the sad thing about it, though, was he had no identification, you know.
Mm,
And
yeah.
talk about that it's a good idea that if you are riding a bike, you should have identification.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So I ride all the time with, the three things that I transfer into my cycling wallet, which is a little wallet made out of old inner tubes. And it's, my driver's license, a credit card, and my health insurance card. So if heaven forbid something would ever happen, someone would at least see, who I was, that I had insurance, because even though hospitals
Right.
are required to service anybody if, they're injured, sometimes it's good to have the insurance card no matter what.
Sure.
And then also too, if I would have a breakdown or something like that too, where I need to pay for something, I also carry a few dollars with me too in case something like that happens. But that's really important. And there's actually a company that's called Road ID that has these bracelets that people can wear, and they can have personal information about themselves on it. And then your cell phone should have an ICE number, an ICE, in case of emergency number. So if you need to call somebody, if someone finds you. So I found a rider before who had a concussion, and I needed to call somebody, and he didn't know who to call at that point. And so I said, do you have an ICE number in there? And he said, he wasn't sure. And I looked it up on his phone, and there was sure enough somebody who was his emergency contact, and I could call them and say, hey, I've got this guy here, and they knew who it was then, and they could be able to come and pick them up.
But unfortunately, this guy was 8 hours, and they didn't know his wife. They couldn't identify anybody. And since you mentioned it, I'll ask you to just explain what an ICE number is then.
Sure. So it's in case of emergency, ICE, in case of emergency. And it's just somebody who has an emergency contact. So you list them in your contacts as ICE. So when somebody just puts in the ICE into someone's phone, it'll come up with that contact who is the person who has said that this is who you should call if I'm in trouble.
Yeah, the only problem is you hopefully can get past their identification code. ICE was before the block phones, so
Yeah. And I think about that too, because on my phone, I have I was getting hacked and people were calling from my phone number. And so I put in a security system on it. And so, so my family knows, how to get past it. But if someone just found me randomly on the road, you can make emergency calls on the phone still, but it's just like call 911, which doesn't help. But again, that's why I carry, my driver's license and those other pieces of identification too. So they would have some kind of information about me, and it'd be a little bit more a roundabout way. But if you are conscious though, then you can also hopefully then tell someone how to bypass your code. And that's all you'd have to remember in terms of not necessarily someone's number.
But good advice, for people should be aware of the fact that things happen when they're cycling, or could happen. So just want to be aware if something does.
Sure. A lot of times we'll say you should ride with other people too, and you should make sure that someone knows where you're going. So those are just basic safety things. So when I leave for a ride, usually I tell my wife or my son or somebody, where I'm going if I'm by myself, certainly, especially if it's off road. And then a lot of times if I can, I'll ride with other people too. So if something would happen to me or to someone I'm riding with, there'd be somebody else there to call for help.
Last question, your advice in terms of listening to a headset as you ride, good or bad idea?
I think it's not a good idea. You want to be aware of your surroundings. So the only time I listen to music when I'm riding is when I'm inside on the trainer. and for me personally, I find it distracting. I like to hear, the wind and the birds and if someone is coming up behind me, a car and things like that too. And just being part of nature. And we talk about that a lot in terms of just healthness, is to be in touch with nature and being outside, and how that can make a big difference on people's health. And so if you have headphones in, a lot of times you don't hear those things. So if I'm doing a group ride, I tell people not to do that at all. And if I have athletes who just insist on it, I always tell them just use one earpiece and keep the other one out.
Randy Warren, if folks want to get in touch with you, either to find out about some of your trainings or your camps, what's the best way to find out about you?
Sure. So I have a website, warrencycling.com. They can just go to that website and there's contact they can get through there, or my email is randy@warrencycling.com. I do a podcast with my brother where we talk almost every week about cycling, mostly racing, and that's just Warren Cycling Podcast. So most things that are warrencycling.com is going to be associated with me on Facebook, Warren Cycling, Instagram, actually, I think it's Bicycle Coach Randy. I'm not sure why I didn't use Warren Cycling for that, but most things Warren Cycling will come up, get to me.
And so you just said something interesting. So the Warren Cycling, so it's a family thing. You mentioned your brother's in it. Your wife cycles. Does your son cycle? Is it a whole family operation?
Yeah, my son's not an enthusiastic cyclist. He doesn't like to ride a lot. But we have a tandem, and in Chicago again it was flat, and there's so many different roads there too that even though his school was 4 miles away, we would at first take a trailer. So I'd take him to school in the trailer, and then when he got a little older, we would take him to school on the back of a tandem. So I had the cranks that were shorter and they fit up on top of the seat tube, and so he could ride starting at 5 years old. And we used to go to school almost every day on a bicycle, either in a trailer or on a tandem. So he still rides. We just did a tour to Apple in Hendersonville
nice.
on Labor Day, and it was a rainy day, and both my wife and my son were out there with me, and my son, who's 17 now, I said, do you want to ride your own bike or ride the tandem? And it was a 25-mile ride, and he goes, I'll do the tandem. So we still do ride for sure. And my wife has done the California AIDS ride, which was like 680 miles in a week. So she's not a racer. She has raced a little bit, but she's not a hardcore cyclist necessarily, but she's done a lot of amazing riding at that for sure. And my brother has also rode a lot too, and both my sisters ride a little bit too. My parents, though, not riders at all.
So they observe. Anyway, Randy Warren, thanks for being my guest on the second half hour of the podcast, the Blaines World podcast. Also like to thank Beth Russo, my guest the first half hour, and my producer, Cappy Cisetti. And we'll hopefully see everybody next week, same time, same place, wherever that is. And Randy, maybe we'll even bump into each other one time. See ya.
Yeah.
Thanks
great.
a lot.
Thanks, Blaine. Thank you.